Welcome back, everyone. We have Anthony with us today, and our big question is: was the moon landing real? Right. That's our question. We may go off onto a couple of other topics, and I can already tell you from the conversation before we hit the record button, we're gonna have to have Anthony back because he likes the same kind of stuff that we do. Because we were just like, what was it? The black satellite, the Black Knight satellite, which has been around forever and ever and ever.
Which will come back to, because I really want
orbits in a way that we can't even orbit now, it's been doing it forever.
We couldn't until
very recently,
within the last.
I think that secret military remote space shuttle thing that they've been doing has done similar orbits to the Black Knight one, but it's very
finally crack it. But it
took a long time.
We found it in that orbit before we could do that orbit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so, it was like a different polar orbit or something like that. I forgot.
Yes, yeah, it was a polar orbit, and we never did polar orbits. We did other orbits, but
because they're harder. A polar orbit's harder.
The background on this is a little bit interesting. Both Daniel and I are Houston boys. We grew up in and around NASA, a lot of that. But Daniel has even more connections with NASA with his dad, having worked on a project. Your dad didn't work for NASA, but he worked on projects for NASA, right? Or
both, actually.
Okay.
He was a contractor for NASA, so he did art. So my dad's a graphic designer, and so he did some contract work with NASA because I remember he had a NASA badge.
Okay, cool.
Get on to NASA property, but he also worked for an aerospace company as well, doing graphic design. But I got to go. I've been to mission control. I've been down on the floor of the neutral buoyancy tank. I've seen a lot of the infrastructure, and so when I hear someone say nothing happened, I'm like, there's a lot of stuff for nothing to have come from it. So
yeah, because you've had more access, and I always got to public tour, school tour type stuff. But really, that's our question is tell us what you think, Anthony, because we don't want to come in with our ideas.
Happened?
What do you? Yeah, okay. Exactly. It's what do you think? What do you think happened with the space program and all this stuff? So
let me tell you this. I think. And this is me speaking out loud, up front and foremost. Where's the technology at? If we've been to the moon, if we've done this before, why is NASA claiming that we don't have the technology to make it to the moon now?
So
why did we stop going?
I think we got there with tinfoil and a shoestring. I don't think we got there well.
Well, there's something to
Russia was decades ahead of us, though.
But there's something on that I want to touch on. It's we know they destroyed the Saturn V rocket plans, and they destroyed the stuff to produce that rocket. And I've never been able to reconcile myself with why. So I get that question. No, I completely get that question.
Footage, somebody recorded over it,
or it's missing. A lot of it's missing. I get that.
I mean, again, I think there's a lot of room for ineptitude. People can totally. Things get taped over. We've all, you tape over the wedding video. Accident. That kind of thing happens. So. There are episodes of TV shows that are lost forever because someone accidentally taped over the only copy of it, kind of thing. So I can totally see that happen.
And I also know that NASA is notoriously bad at losing stuff. There's a story, I don't remember if it was on a History Channel special or somebody was talking about it, where they were walking through somewhere in the one in Florida, Cape Canaveral, and they opened a random door to a storage closet and found blue spacesuits that said 007 on it. One of them said 007 on it. One said something else. And they're like, where the heck did these come from? This wasn't part of NASA. And eventually they figured out that there had been a military program that these had been part of that was predating most of the the public space program before we got spy satellites, and then we ended up developing the camera spy satellites. But they were going to send people up like to take the photos and man the cameras, and that's what those were for. But nobody knew they even existed. But they're in some random storage closet at the Cape because they just got shelved there, and people walked away from it. So that kind of stuff happens in these massive complexes, and I think that's something, if you've never been to NASA, the facilities are massively huge.
I mean, I remember my dad, when we would go, we were going to building like 43. Like it was, I mean, you know, it's a complex. Okay, so I want to get some clarification here. So, do you think there was a space program? We can agree that they were sending probes. There was the Apollo. So Mercury did. I mean, so like, do you think there wasn't an Apollo program, or do you think it just we weren't successful to getting to the moon?
Yeah, that's my question. Is like what we know launches happened. People were there, and we saw rockets shoot up into the sky. So, following that timeline, where are you? What do you think's real? What do you think was not? What that's kind of our question for you.
I personally, I don't know if I think that we made it to the moon or not. The reason why I say that is because Russia was decades ahead of us in the 50s and 60s on the space program. There's a reason why the first astronaut was Russian. There's a reason why the space station also was Russian. And then somehow, some way, the United States is like, oh, we've got to make it to the moon. And we do it in how many years did it take us to get there? And Russia had already invested something like 10 years before us or something to that effect. We go, allegedly, we get there. How good were TVs back in the 60s or 70s? How good was radio signal transmission? How is it that we have these images and we have these broadcasts and everything else, and you can't even watch, the San Francisco Giants play baseball from Sacramento, California, but we can allegedly watch a moon landing from Earth? Who's holding the cameras? The space shuttle had a tiny window.
Well, but they had cameras mounted on themselves.
They also had
to take the pictures.
They also had cameras that were standalone cameras and some of them in the later missions were operated by mission control, which is why there's some delay in it, you see in some of the stuff.
I mean, so
where do you think the footage came from? Oh, sorry, Daniel, I ran right over you. I'm sorry.
Well, hang on. So I'm just like, so do you think we launched Mercury rockets? Do you think there was a Mercury program?
That I don't know of. With Mercury rockets,
Mercury is the first
one
ones.
Before. I mean, so
it goes Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, right?
Right. And but I mean, also, like this is the thing. Like I hear this argument where like, well, I don't think we went to the moon landing. I'm like, there was a program called Ranger. We sent 18 probes to the moon before we sent anybody there. Like most people, I didn't know it was a thing until a couple of years ago. Like there is a huge, massive infrastructure of people, millions of people across every state in the country. You had people at Northrop Grumman, you had people at Boeing, you had people at McDonnell Douglas, you had people at every single one of these companies building this stuff, testing things, launching things. There's science. I mean, like, I don't understand how you can. I mean, they built a rocket, they launched it, we watched it fly into the sky.
We watched a rocket fly up, but how do you know where it's going after it's out of our line of sight? Okay, and also, didn't Buzz Aldrin, as he was getting up in age, wasn't he starting to say that we never been to the moon?
No. In fact, the guy who kept asking him about it, he punched out. Yeah, he as a 78-year-old man, he like beat the guy up.
He laid him out.
Yeah.
I mean, so I mean, I think sort of the way that I look at this is when you've got something like this, I think the burden of proof is on you. I mean, like a giant rocket flew into the air, and if the response is like, well, you couldn't see it, so it could have done anything like that. There's what what is your foundation of skepticism here beyond just, I mean, hey, I don't trust the government either, but like I saw rockets. So I'm,
good. So for me, it's not just a distrust in government, but why did we stop going? If that's something that we're able to do,
money.
Money.
Oh, it's money.
There was no profit in it at the time.
It was so expensive to do that project. I mean, because that wasn't, the space program was not a science program. We were in the middle of a Cold War.
It was a propaganda
war effort. This was a propaganda war effort. And once that wasn't an issue anymore, they tried to turn it into a space program, into a science program. And that's where we got the space station, and they sent people back to the moon again to get rocks and do tests and all that sorts of things. But like, there was no, the public wasn't behind it. The Congress wasn't behind it. It was a huge, they'd much rather spend the money in Vietnam or wherever they put the money, wherever else they lined their pockets with it. But like, that's sort of the thing that I saw from the other side of my dad just being like, the new director of NASA's a moron. Like, I don't know why they're wasting this money. And there was already a project in place, and then they canceled it and they're starting a new one, and now they got to start over.
Well,
I mean, like, I think it's actually governmental ineptitude is why we didn't go back. I mean, they knew they were going to have to retire the shuttles. They didn't prepare for that. And then one of them blew up because they weren't doing their job. I mean, like,
two of them. We lost two of them. We lost Challenger, and then we lost the other. Yeah, because I remember when the Challenger
was a different thing. Challenger was actually
still ineptitude. They weren't listening to their own people.
Yes.
But this also, I mean, there's also a deeper run of this. Is let's not forget that von Braun laid out the ability for the U.S. to get to the moon by like 58 or 59 and Mars by the end of the 60s.
Yeah.
And we were following his line until somebody was like, oh, yeah, remember he's a Nazi? And then we dropped that. But to go back to your initial question is like, how did we motivate and get ourselves there? It was really easy. The CIA assassinated a sitting president, and that gave Lyndon Johnson we got to get to the moon and beat them Ruskies, because it was Kennedy's
project.
It was Kennedy's project, and the patsy they framed for it was a communist. So to be perfectly honest, because. Yeah. There's one thing that
the country was behind the this is the president's program. Let's kick the Russians' ass.
And he died. He died because he wanted it. And let us not forget that as horribly inept as Americans can be, the last thing you want to do is motivate us in a single direction in some way, shape, or form, because we're capable of amazing things when that happens. So I think that's how we were able to, because we had plans in place. We had a lot of that stuff. It was just taking forever. And Kennedy's death, however it happened, Kennedy's death galvanized that mission and cut through massive amounts of red tape.
Yeah. There's a moment in every single one of the documentaries and in the book I read about this as well, where there's a call to the head of flight at NASA, and it's the president, and it's like, you've got as much money as you need, make it fucking happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were just like, okay. And they just threw the entire U.S. economy at it, and they were able to do it.
And they did some stupid stuff and made some mistakes. With Apollo 1, like we didn't even stop to think, maybe we shouldn't use a pure oxygen environment where there might be a spark, and we killed people for it. Yeah.
We were going so fast, we were making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why we stopped going, because I mean, I don't know if you've ever those landers they're so fragile. Like all that stuff is so, I mean, like again, it's tinfoil and shoestrings.
Have you seen the one in the Smithsonian, Anthony? Have you ever been to the Smithsonian to see it?
No, that's another institution that just.
But the aerospace Smithsonian Museum, the aerospace one where they actually have the stuff where you can go see the physical. You can see it's literally tinfoil. like on the thing, and you're like, oh my god, there's no way that this could
Because
survive in atmosphere.
They had
Light.
to make them really light.
Mhm.
Now, so let me ask you this. So we've got billionaires, like 100 billionaires out there that are interested in space, that are building things for space. How come Bezos or Elon haven't went to the moon? Just to say,
Well, we're
what,
headed
let's go to the
there.
moon.
It's a whole different mechanism. So if you play some Kerbal Spaceflight, you can get into some of the ideas of like the amount of energy it takes to get into certain orbits. Everything that Elon's been doing is low orbit. The stuff that we're doing with like satellites is all below the ISS. They're talking about having some new stuff that's going to be above the ISS, even a little farther out. But it's hard to get up there because it's a speed issue. And so what you got to do is get way out into an Earth orbit, and then you got to slingshot yourself all the way up and around. So it's not.
You've also got to move enough fuel
to build. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, think about how big the Saturn V was.
Isn't there also a massive amount of radiation that we don't have shells or shielding for? That you have to punch through as well in order to.
The Van Allen radiation belt.
About the Van Allen radiation belt. Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing. A bunch of people went through it. I mean, like, it seems like, it feels more like, to me, it's one of those things where now that they've realized it's there, they're scared of it. They didn't know it was there before.
So let me give you another framework for it too. It's also the people of the time. We were also setting nukes off in Nevada all the time. And we killed over half the people who were in that John Wayne movie, The Conqueror, that he did about Genghis Khan, one of the worst movies he ever did. Half those people died of radiation because there was a nuke going off 100 miles away. And we were also
His family actually blames that. For getting cancer.
The people that we were putting in those space missions were fighter pilots, test pilots, the kind of people who are like, hey, there's radiation. They're like, don't talk to me about radiation, you moron. Make it go faster. You know, it's the kind of people that it was a different breed of people. These are the people who won the Great War or won World War II, and they did all this stuff. And so, yes, I think the radiation belt's there, and it may have cut some of those people's lives shorter. But I don't think they would have stopped anyway.
These guys were strapping themselves onto a giant bomb
and saying, light it up.
So, like, I don't think they were concerned about, like, hey, in 30 years you may have cancer. And again, I don't think they had the sensors. I don't think they knew it was there. And maybe it's not as bad as they think it is. Maybe it wasn't there before.
Maybe it's worse.
Maybe it's gotten worse over time. I mean, who knows?
But
maybe the Van Allen radiation belt was caused by all of the nukes we set off. Maybe all the radiation. I'm making shit up. I don't know.
No, there's
you said something earlier,
though.
The
moon is manufactured also. I mean,
well, you know what? I'm more willing to believe
with you all day
long. I'm much more willing to talk to you about how the moon is actually a spaceship and is in our orbit, and that's why it rang after we dropped something on. But getting back to what you said about Elon and all that. Hold on.
Hang on. Wait. You said something, and I want to tag on it. Part of the argument that the moon isn't real is that when Apollo 13 dropped its payload on the moon, it rang like a bell. So if we didn't go, how did it ring? And if it didn't ring, why? I mean, like, there's a cyclical argument there that if we think that the moon isn't real, which I'm firmly willing to have that discussion, like, part of the evidence most of the evidence that we're using to say that the moon isn't real is shit we got when we were on the moon.
Yeah, seismographs that were put there by the astronauts and this other stuff. The mirrors that are put there we can fire lasers off of.
That's the other one I was going to say. There is a mirror on the moon. You can fire a laser at it and it will bounce back to you.
And I want to address a couple of
that's my we left a thing. You can also get a good telescope and look and see shit up there. Like you can see tracks and
I want to touch on a couple of the things that you had mentioned, because like you mentioned the billionaires who are trying to do it now. Elon Musk is a perfect example. He is trying to make space flight more cost effective. So one of the things he's done, which was science fiction 10 years ago.
Oh, is land the rocket?
Yeah, launch a rocket and re-land it and be able to reuse it. Yeah, that is huge because his goal is how can I put a colony on Mars, much less the moon?
Yeah.
I can only do it if I can bring the costs down, right? And so I think he is Henry Ford trying to figure out how to build the assembly line that makes the Model T work right now. That's what Elon's doing. Bezos, I think, just threw money at it. The other Brit guy, I think, is just he's more interested in not even really low Earth orbit, but Richard Branson. He's more interested in like high atmosphere tourism type stuff.
Yeah.
But Elon is the only one I
Bezos.
see. Well, Bezos, I think, is just stupid and throwing money at something right now. And he's not really paying attention to it because he's got like a hot girlfriend and he's just off doing that other stuff.
It doesn't seem like Bezos is, I mean, and I don't know. They don't seem to be doing very much. So it's hard to really assess if they're actually doing anything. But I mean, Elon is seriously, seems to be doing this. I was going to say it cost $185 million to launch the Saturn V missions.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
in their money.
In what year? Yeah.
In 69 to 71, the cost of the missions was $185 million for those rockets. So and we were launching them and then just watching them plummet to the earth and
burn up.
Destroy.
Yeah.
They were gone.
In fact, we used them to launch like military satellites toward the end that we wanted to get really high because they were there.
Again, it's a velocity issue. It's weird. You don't think about it. When you launch a rocket, you'll notice they go up and they start to go like this because what they're actually doing is trying to go faster than the spin of the Earth, and actually so they're going this direction to then catch the gravity pull and come back around. So
there's a neat scene in the movie Hatari, which is a John Wayne comedy. No, it's Hatari, a John Wayne comedy, which is great. If you've never seen it, you should, where they fire a rocket off to throw a net over a big tree so they can catch some monkeys. It's about people who got animals for zoos back in like the 60s. But it actually fires off pointed the wrong way and goes up. And then because of the way the curvature and stuff and the earth spinning arcs back over and comes back around, which you can actually make a rocket do, which is really cool. But the other thing you mentioned earlier about like the radio signals. Radio signals are amazing. I've got my amateur radio license. I'm studying for my second level license. I can talk to the space station with this. Okay. The radio signals will go a lot farther than you think. It takes a little bit of time. There's a time delay because it's traveling at the speed of light. So there is a time delay. So
I think it's 10 minutes to the moon.
It's actually, believe it or not, easier to send a signal to the moon and get a signal back than it is to send signal from the stadium you're talking about to the city you're talking about, because we're going out and back instead of dealing with the curvature of the earth. And because when you're trying to send signal around the earth without satellites, the only way that radio signal works is you have to hit the ionosphere in such a way at a certain time of day during a certain sunspot cycle to bounce it down, which is why we really didn't have national broadcasts until we had satellite broadcasts, right? So that, and a lot of people don't think that way. The curvature of the earth, this causes all kinds of problems.
I was also going to say to your statement about seeing the football game, there's clouds. There's actually physical interference. And so when you're going through space, there's nothing. So there's not that same kind of interference.
And with the video evidence, they're able to hold the cameras that still in space. There was no
there's no wind.
There's no stabilization technologies back then. There was
here's my one concession that I would be willing to make, and this is the thing that I've talked to Bill about before, is you might be able to convince me that the footage that they used was pre-recorded because of whatever, or they were worried they weren't going to make the signal transmission wasn't going to work or something, and so that they pre-shot some stuff and used that, or they were doing training. I mean, we know they did training with the cameras because they knew they were going to need to use the cameras. They also had monopods on them to mount, and they were mounted to themselves.
I would also go so far.
hang on. They were mounted to their chest, and they could look down through the top of it, just barely,
in
to a
zero gravity
viewfinder.
with the big
No, there's
helmets.
some gravity. There's
No,
some
there's
gravity.
not. There's not zero gravity on the moon. There's gravity.
No,
it's not Earth. It's not Earth gravity. But no. The helmets were designed so that, because their helmet is stationary, they can move their head inside of there. They can move all around. So it was designed so that they could see down through a viewfinder. I mean, it was built to do this, and so that thing is mounted to their chest. So it's actually quite.
Kodak built the cameras
they
to
would
their
stop and
specifications.
mount. Yeah, I mean these literally were the definition of custom designed cameras that they
Again,
designed
part of
specifically to be built
What kind
into
of
the suit
film
and be used by them.
does something like that use?
I don't. I'd have to look that up. Kodak made most of it, I think. But
Yeah,
I would even go so far.
Pressure on the camera. You open up a camera that has film. Like how?
Well, they didn't open.
They were all self-contained.
Yeah, they didn't open any of the stuff.
It was
that's my understanding.
SO-186A is 16 millimeter and 70 millimeter. They had two different films up there.
But I would even be willing to go so far as to say that they shot some. I would be willing to accept an argument that they shot the footage because we needed the win.
Yeah.
So bad that they had a plan that if they crashed and burned and died,
they would just lie.
They would say that they died on the way back, but we made it there okay, right? I mean, the other thing that for me is a struggle of at least Apollo 11.
Mm-hmm.
They were so close to crashing and burning. I mean, it was not a good landing. They missed their shots.
The abort light was going off. Like the system in the thing was telling them you need to hit the abort because you're out of gas.
They had 11 seconds of fuel left. Yeah, or something like that.
It and dropped them. I mean, it was.
And we also know the president had two speeches written. One for if we successfully landed, because it's been published. One if they were successfully landed. One if they crashed and died. But to be perfectly fair to your belief system, they lost the tapes. Okay, that is a big.
No, they didn't lose them. They recorded over them.
I believe
I've heard both.
More than lost.
I've heard both.
I believe recorded over more than lost.
But there is like. And some of the stuff looks a little weird, like it looks like there's shadows that are there. And I've heard arguments that these are people behind the stage. This is the way the sun was. And it's really grainy footage. There's also some time delay in there.
Standing up.
It has a wire in it.
Yeah.
It's actually a T-framed flag like this. It's got a metal pole and a metal thing because they knew it wasn't going to flap in the wind.
Well, and they also did it wrong, too, which is why it looks like it's waving.
Yeah, and then when they put it in the ground, there's actually a couple times where you can see the bottom of it kind of move, because that's the only part that should move is the bottom right-hand corner away from the edge.
Yeah.
Because the rest
I remember seeing something about, like, the shoes, or something about, like, the moon shoes, or, like, giant, like, shoes or whatever else, but in some of the photos, it's like they're wearing... Like they forgot to edit out the shoes or forgot to.
I think there's some weird anomalies on the film. It is old and grainy film. A lot of we only have. It's like watching the recovered Doctor Who episodes. We're watching a recording of a beta copy that somebody didn't throw away because the masters are gone, right? Yeah. So it's older, it's grainy. And I understand why people think that happened. And I think what Daniel was going to is like we'd almost accept the argument that maybe they didn't land the first one, but or we didn't have good video of the first one and all that's faked. But I think the later missions, the quality gets better, the stuff gets better. We've got moon rocks that are hard to explain. Somehow we got stuff up there and we got it back. At least that's my understanding. Now, do you think we never got there at all? I mean, or do you think, because, you talk about the bell 11, ringing thing.
I mean, let's just talk about
17 was the last one.
Let's talk about the national crisis we went through on Apollo 13. What the hell was that then? Like there was days of news coverage of the astronauts. I mean, is that just a national hoax?
Let me ask you this: there was days of news coverage when the little submersible went missing, also, but they knew on Sunday, and they didn't report that it crashed until Thursday.
Well, yes. What you're saying is, did Navy intelligence decide not to let everyone know how good their Navy intelligence was? Yes, I think that's absolutely true. They heard it go pop and went, "Fuck! Well, we can't say anything because they can't know that we can."
Yeah, we want our national.
They were in the ocean. You know what I mean?
And
I can believe
to be perfectly fair, Anthony, we know the government lies to us, right? So that to me gives you a leg to stand on, whether you and I agree or not, because we just found out not only does the government lie to us, it lies to itself. The main national security military guy for Biden has been in the ICU for like 7 days, and they didn't tell the White House. And that just came out. Like that, and he's still there, and they don't know why. And this is the guy who's supposed to be telling the president what to do if war happens. And the president didn't know his own dude is in the ICU with some kind of mystery illness. So does the government lie? Obviously.
This just feels too big. This is not an assassination plot. This is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that, or maybe not that many, but tens and tens of thousands of people that were involved in fabrication and testing and manufacturing of suits and survival kits. And I mean, there's just
well, and
but hang on, but like, why? What's the? I mean, that if they're gonna, it just seems like
so. Well, and here's the other big thing for me. One of the astronauts who supposedly would have landed on the moon would have said something, and I say this because one of the astronauts who landed on the moon has come out and said, yeah, there's damn UFOs. I saw one land when I was a military guy, and I saw another one here, and I saw another one there. If he's willing to tell us there's UFOs in a time before 2017 when you were labeled a kook, that he's willing to say that, but he's like, no, but I had my feet on the moon. I'm kind of like, okay. And I think someone would have come out and been like, yeah, we faked it. But nobody I know who has worked in the program. There's too many people for it not to have leaked in some way, shape, or form. And everyone I've heard has said it was fake was someone from the outside looking in, analyzing it. And I'm not saying that that's not a good way to come at things. Sometimes it's the only way to come at it. But there's so many people involved. And so much stuff came out of it. And you also said, like, where's the technology? Well, we have a lot of it. I mean, I have some of it right here. It's Velcro. Right?
Yeah.
Velcro is NASA moon technology and so much other stuff.
But NASA
circuit boards
didn't keep that stuff. I mean,
no. There was a. So actually, hang on. There was a law when they formed NASA. They passed. Because they are the way they are. They said NASA is not allowed to profit from anything that they create as part of this process. That's why the For All Mankind show is so good.
It's different.
In the show, they were allowed to do that, which made them more. That was the problem. They were creating all this technology, but they couldn't use it to make money to make the program better. This is why Elon's having so much success. He's spending money to build stuff, which he then makes money from, which he can then use to improve. And NASA was hamstrung on that. They couldn't do that.
And I think that's important because they changed the law in For All Mankind when the Russians landed first, so NASA could then fund itself. But in all of this, the stuff like Elon's done and the bringing the cost down has gotten to the point where, as an amateur radio guy, you can actually now, for a couple of $100, orbit a satellite. They have brought the cost down to the point where there's like 15 amateur radio satellites that amateur radio people use to talk to each other that are orbited because it's cheap enough now that they've got a few extra pounds on payloads. You can just throw on a few $100 and get something, sent into orbit.
that's something that NASA began the miniaturization process that we're in now. So like the Apollo landers, as big as they were, it was switches, and I mean it was all
vacuum tubes
mechanical and electrical and vacuum tubes and things like that. Well,
and
that's a graphing calculator now. Like we've compressed that down to a graphing calculator, has the same amount of processing power as the landers did. So I also think sort of what happened is like they got there, they couldn't really afford to continue the process to make it better and smaller and cheaper and safer because they didn't have them. Because Congress wouldn't give them any money. It wasn't
we won
popular anymore.
And after like the second landing, like nobody was watching until the accident with Apollo 13. But there's a really interesting scene in the movie Apollo 13 where they're touring the hangar where they are assembling all the rockets, and somebody asks, what's the next advancement? And he's like, well, we're locked into 63 or 1963 or like 1970 or 67 or something like that, because we have to be mission ready. So no new technology is going in because everything's been vetted. And so we now have to produce like the next run of product with this vetting, because of the testing. Because let's be perfectly honest here. We're sending people on the biggest not atomic explosive in human history, strapped to it in a tiny bubble made out of mylar and tinfoil and aluminum in an air bubble. You got to test it. I mean, but I keep coming back to, we know the government lies to us, and they've lost some of the stuff, and where, why I get, why did we stop? I want to know why we stopped too. We should be on Mars by now. Right?
Congress.
We should be mining asteroids. We should not be using child slave labor to get our lithium ion for our batteries. We should be pulling it out of an asteroid we've parked in orbit because the technology was laid out for us by Von Braun with Walt Disney in the 50s. You can go watch those shows that he did where he lays it all out. They're amazing on the Disney Plus app right now.
So
sorry, I'm very passionate about why we stopped. I mean, it's like this is stupid.
Why we stopped seems like the reason why. Like I just don't.
So and here's honestly, why we stopped is literally like I think it's stupidity, not conspiracy. Like I really do think it's one of those
short-sighted bureaucracy.
What thing was so super important to us 10 years ago politically that no one gives a flying crap about anymore now? Like I can't even think of a thing. But even like Ukraine was really important for a while, and it's sort of people aren't paying as much attention, and that doesn't matter why. But like people's mood shift, and what happened was, there was this huge thing and people pushed for it and everybody got excited. And I mean, if you watch some of the documentaries about this stuff, I mean, like people just sort of stopped caring. It wasn't exciting anymore. It was routine. Nothing ever happened. And that's why when Apollo 13 happened, they suddenly cared. Now, I want to say one other thing. The one thing that makes me feel like it's not a conspiracy, just the biggest thing, is that if you were trying to cover something up and you were trying not to make it public, why would you give the family squawk boxes? So the families of the astronauts had boxes in their houses where they could hear mission control talking to the astronauts, so that they could they wouldn't hear everything, but they could hear a lot of what was going on. If you're actively trying to trick everyone, why would you include people in on all those conversations? Like
I don't. I don't.
Because again, if the plan is deception, why even offer that? Like it's not going to affect you either way. It's not. It's whether the family has because soldiers don't have speakers in their houses. So why would astronauts? No one would question.
They have radios and they have.
But it's at some level.
But hang on. Let me finish. The Army, you can call home, but they don't have active squawks going on as they're going through their missions, and they were listening to them do check-ins and buy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that they were included in. So like the fact that they included them in that feels to me proof that they were actually doing something. Because why would you loop them into something that was fake when you don't?
Why would you make it public knowledge that they had that unless you're trying to use that as a reason to
this is many
people.
years later when people found out.
Yeah, it came out much later.
It was not a public thing that people knew.
Because if they had, the ham radio people would have been trying to listen into it.
And and it would be a security risk if people knew that there was that. So it wasn't a public thing. It was just something that people found out later in documentaries and books. And
the other thing for me is, if it was going to be faked, it would have had to be such a small conspiracy of people, because I don't buy all the dedicated people working the hours that they put in at Mission Control, all the dedicated people at Boeing building the stuff, all the people slaving with the overtime, time away from family, time away from this, the guy the guy who pissed himself in For All Mankind, that actually happened, and to talk about, sitting there because he was so worried about the guy that he pissed himself rather than go to the bathroom because he's worried about what's going on. You would have had to have lied to all those people. Right.
Well, and you would have also had to effectively deceive
all of those
really smart PhDs and doctors, and
because at the time the government was still able to play on patriotism to get the talent, whereas now the talent follows the money. Right. Nobody's patriotic enough to do. And I think that's another reason that NASA has kind of fallen by the wayside. Is talent goes where the money is. So the really smart rocket people are going to work for Elon. They're not going to work for NASA, right?
Well,
because
NASA
government has salary caps.
Exactly, because of what you said. They follow the money, and NASA has no money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Every president who has put forward a plan, thing that pissed me off the most about Obama is he trashed Bush's plan. The thing that pissed me the most about Trump was he trashed Obama's plan. The thing that pissed me off about Biden the most is he killed the Trump plan, because everybody puts a plan to get us back going again in place, and they want to kill it because they don't want it associated with the guy in front of them. I'm like, you need this to be above your petty bullshit politics. Right. And unfortunately, the only time it's done that was when somebody died.
Yeah,
and
it carried
through. It was bipartisan. Yeah.
Let me ask you this: so we have all this money when military needs to, sell weapons or whatever else. The whole Ukraine stuff going on. The whole now it's what is it? It's Gaza and everything else.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We have the money to manufacture wars, but we don't have the money to, I guess, go back to the moon. I mean,
I would argue. Let me address that. I would argue that the military has been capable of going to the moon and back for decades. I think the public space program stalled out at low Earth orbit. I have often said on my podcast that I'm a firm believer that Stargate SG-1 is basically a documentary, right? And we've been building our own spaceships, because the guy who ran Lockheed Skunk Works, in one of his last speeches before he died, said, "Oh yeah, all that sci-fi stuff with him, we've been able to take ET back home for decades." And this was the guy who ran all our secret aerospace stuff. He's like, that Star Trek stuff, that's nothing compared to what we can actually do.
Didn't Robert Bigelow also say that they're already here and they've been here already? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, but Bigelow made his money a different way.
Bigelow owns
Skinwalker Ranch.
Bill will go.
He also owns Bigelow Aerospace, right?
Yes, but that came much later. He made his money in real estate. Yeah, Bigelow made his money in real estate, and then he built the aerospace, and then
But so I mean, we just, the last guy we had on was talking about MH370, the Malaysian airplane that disappeared about 14 years ago. Have you seen any of the recent stuff that's sort of come out on this?
No.
Oh, you should watch the
I
last
remember.
episode.
I was listening to it a little bit before this one.
There's
Yeah,
2 different videos. They look.
but they
fucking
sync
real.
up or whatever is what I
And
heard
they
you
sync
all
up.
talking about.
They're both tracking the same thing. It's an airplane
Mhm.
flying through. These 3 orbs come around, and it just fucking disappears.
It's just gone.
And it's I've seen a million UFO videos on the internet, and they all look fake. And the first thing I saw when I pulled this up is I was like, oh shit,
It looked
this
like the Tic Tac
actually looks
video.
real. Like
Yeah, it looked like
you're
the military
this
Tic Tac
doesn't-
videos.
Yeah, it doesn't look fake. It looks real. The angles look. I mean, it just looks too good to have been faked. But like that's
have to
the
check that
argument that you've got places like Lockheed Martin and places where they've got the idea is that at some point they or the government or some other who knows got their hands on some stuff and have given it to them. I mean, it's the same thing that
The Smithsonian.
the guy that the guy Rogan's always talking about from forever ago, Element 151.
Bob Lazar. Yeah, Bob Lazar.
Yeah, I mean that's what Lazar was talking about, and now it seems like we've got Congress and we had Fraser and like so. I mean, I am 100% on board that, and maybe that's why the space program stalled out. Why are we screwing with these rockets when we have this other tech? Let's just stop. Let's just use this. But we can't tell anybody because we want to keep it secret.
Well,
so
in 9/11.
Well, before we get into
people say Building 7 is where they were doing the work to figure out where these $4 or $5 trillion of misallocated funds
like
was going.
the thing that Rumsfeld came out. The thing that Rumsfeld came out like the day before and said all this money's missing. Yeah. But let us not forget
that conspiracy. I'm willing to get behind because it doesn't take that many people for that to happen.
Well, there's also contractors that say that we've been burrowing.
Yeah, I mean.
No. We're gonna have you back. We're gonna have to have you back on. There's so many good conspiracies we can talk about.
But see, that's the thing, Anthony. Like, people are coming out and saying we're digging tunnels. The UFOs are real. There aren't really many people there. No one's coming out and saying the moon landing. No, there's not some high level Apollo 2 astronaut come out going like, oh, it's all fucking bullshit. Like everybody's like, no, we fucking went. And so like, that's why it feels because it would be so leaky. Like there's so many people involved in that.
You ask like where the technology went. I want to give you another example of how I think the military took a lot of those good scientists and then redirected them towards something else. So the Apollo program basically ended in 72, 73. I don't remember when Apollo 17 was, but right about then. The design of the F-117 stealth fighter, the F-117 stealth fighter started in 1975, and it first flew in 1980. And you know what was going on in 1980 all over Texas and all over the Southwest? Black triangle UFOs with 3 lights flying around everywhere. And then it wasn't until, Saddam Hussein decided to light it up in 91 that we're like, oh yeah, by the way, for 11 years, we've had this thing that could have dropped a nuke on Moscow and they wouldn't have seen it coming because it was a nuclear bomber.
I really believe that they stopped working on that stuff. Like
well, and again, this comes back to the government lies to us about stupid stuff. They said that they decommissioned that plane.
Lockheed? Who is
that? Skunk Works. That was Lockheed Skunk Works.
Yeah. Lockheed is Skunk Works.
Yeah, that was Lockheed. But they told us that the F-117 was completely decommissioned, and there's no line item for it. But we know for a fact, because there's video of it, they're still flying it right now for training missions, and they're using it as training missions. But they're lying about the funding. They're saying the funding's for one thing, and they're saying they're all decommissioned, but we've got like people catching them on their iPhones flying down the missile ranges in California. And apparently they're using it to simulate like cruise missiles and stuff because it's so hard to see a cruise missile on radar or whatever. Why are you lying to us about flying an airplane that is saving us money? Yeah. It makes no sense, government. Don't lie about something like that. That's stupid. It only feeds it feeds more fuel to all of these things, and again, gives you more of a leg to stand on because the government obviously is lying to us about
Now,
stupid
let me
shit.
ask you this. On that one, is that the government? Is that private military? Which
No, that's
branch
government.
is that? That it is government, you're saying. So is that
the military is the
Air
one flying
Force?
it.
Is that Army?
It's Air Force flying it,
Who knows? Yeah.
right? The Air
Aren't
Force
they
is
all
flying it, and the
private
Navy's
industry
flying
now,
it.
or
No, not
no.
all.
they're all contractors and
No.
Air Force. As far as I'm aware, I don't think there is a private military Air Force.
Not in the U.S. No, if you fly one of those planes,
fighter jet capabilities.
To fly one of those planes, you must be a couple of things. One, you need to be a commissioned officer, and two, it takes a lot of training to fly those special airplanes. But I guarantee you, my buddy son, who is a maintenance tech for the F-22s, who's only making like 25 grand a year, is not a private contractor, but he just the Air Force is paying him to live in Hawaii. Boo hoo, right?
yeah.
There are. Oh, go ahead.
There is a private military Air Force. Like
Yeah.
there's one out there.
I'm sure there are.
But they've got like MiGs and F-16s and stuff. Like it's not anything.
But isn't that how the military though is hiding the money? Because if you have contractors that you're contracting out to store and house and invent and develop,
that's a different thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about military waste and
that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole mess of Congress and. I mean that's again back to like that's government ineptitude. That's just like
and the ability to get around the Freedom of Information Act. That's more where I think that is coming from. This is like, well, we don't want to tell them that we're using this old plane because then they'll want to know why we decommissioned it in the first place. And if we just say that we need to spend $50,000 on every toilet seat and $10,000 on every hammer, we can just reactivate the damn thing and not tell the select committee of these morons in Congress that got elected. And they'll just, if we call it maintenance, they'll just pass the damn budget.
We go back in and say, hey, these planes we mothballed, that we want to reactivate them and it's going to cost X amount of money, then they're going to argue and they're not going to do it. And so it's just easier for us to add a line item here and just not tell anyone and just ask for forgiveness later. I can imagine that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Okay.
I mean, we know there's abuse of all that kind of stuff. But I think what we're looking at, there's two pieces of that. I mean, I think definitely you've got the private aerospace industry appears to have been is in cahoots with some portion of the government, and I wonder at this point if the government actually isn't even involved anymore. Like there's one dude somewhere, a cigarette smoking man.
Let me rephrase that. I believe
this, but hang
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think that like starting with Roswell. And apparently there was something before that because Rush wouldn't talk about it. So, but like starting with Roswell, it seems like because that came out in the papers, people seemed to think it was real, and then very quickly they were retracted and redacted and tried to change the story. And so like it seems like at that point, for whatever reason, the government decided that this secret was too important to tell anyone. For whatever reason they decided. And over the next 70 years, this secret has gotten so wildly out of hand that to now come back and go like, okay, so we ruined 750 careers, we killed 157 people, we destabilized 7 governments so that we could hide the fact that aliens are real. And why did we do it? We kind of forgot why we decided it was so important for this to be a secret that we couldn't tell anyone. Like, I think it's that. Like, it's some sort of like, but that they've gotten all out into the private
I also
sector.
think there's an unofficial fourth branch of government that's part of the problem here. We have the elected congressional stuff. We have the executive branch, which is the president, and then we have the judicial branch. consistent bureaucracy. Call it the swamp, call it whatever you want it. And I think that's where your cigarette smoking men come in. And some of them are private contractors, some of them are government employees, some of them have inherited a secret, inherited a file, and they look at it and go, oh my God, if I say this or do anything about it, it's going to bring the whole house of cards down. So they just keep stacking stuff on it. But I think that's that military industrial bureaucracy complex that Eisenhower warned us about. It wasn't just the military is going to take over. It's these people need to. It's the whole problem with the U.S. military right now. The shooters don't run the military. This jobs program that is the Pentagon, and like 90% of the people we have in the military roughly don't actually have anything to do with logistics, preparing the soldiers for combat, or getting the soldiers doing the combat or anything. They're there to make sure that their jobs are there and pat everybody else on the back. And the military is not like it was in World War II and lean and mean and fighting and ready to go. It is a jobs program. And I think that ties into a lot of these things, which is all part of the problem.
I think they were looking for Ukraine to spike interest, to get people to start enlisting again. And when that didn't work, and it's coming out now, Ukraine is just a cash grab, a money grab for the elite. Then the military industrial complex, well, now it's like, all right, well, let's go to the age old war of here, and let's see if this might entice people to want to go ahead and raise arms.
Other things happened with that were really interesting too, because I live right next to a big military base. I've watched a lot of this. I've watched a lot of the analysis being done by former soldiers on this, and a lot of the stuff that we sent over there was like, you know what? We've got all this stuff in storage that was obsolete in 1980. Let's send all that over to Ukraine. And then we need new stuff because it's not on our inventory anymore. And that thing that we're trying to push through, like the big one is the M113s. Now, granted, I think Ukraine has used those armored personnel carriers extremely well, but they were all here like in Fort Hood and other places. Now they're all gone. Now we don't have anything for the reservists to use if we call everybody up to war. So we need to buy new ones. And those Bradleys are getting kind of long in the tooth. So we don't want to buy those anymore. We need a new one. So let's build a new one. Let's invent a new one. And let's now spend more money. And we'll do this by giving away the old stuff. Because it was actually cheaper for us to give the Ukraine those M113s. And it's saving us money that they're now able to redirect to other things, because we were having to keep all those in running order. A lot of those things were built in the 60s, but we had to maintain them. We were buying new engines and parts for stuff that was built in the 60s. You know how hard and expensive it is to keep a 1960s car running? Much less something built to military specs, which isn't always that great. But we kind of got a little...
Can I...
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was thinking, can I shift gears to one more topic that's been heavy on my head? Mount freaking Shasta. What have you heard? What do you think about Mount Shasta?
I don't know. Hang on.
Which
one is it? Is this the mountain in California where everybody goes
This is California,
missing?
Yeah, where people disappear, go missing randomly. There's instances where sound stops. No sound, shadowy figures. I
know very little about this one. I've touched on it a little bit, and I've been reading some of the 411 books. I think something weird is going on there. I don't know what. I haven't looked into it enough to know that.
Did you guys hear about Miami recently? The shadowy potential conspiracy.
Yeah, but that got debunked really quick. Apparently, it's just 3 shadows of some people walking off camera and stuff. If you look at it again, you're kind of like, I saw it too, and it looked weird. But I was like, I bet that's a trick of the light, not a thing. Again, I think there was an alien in Vegas. I think that was that.
That was so weird.
I don't think the California one was.
Well, the Vegas one, is that the landing in the backyard or something like
that?
Yeah, the cop caught the thing going off on his. It was on his body cam. he had his body cam on and caught this thing going.
Go.
And then got a call. And it was like a green thing. And
thing going on, and the family's like, "Oh my God, they're in our backyard! Please come!"
They like shot at it too, or something, right? Or,
I think I don't remember, but it may have happened. But they were so panicked.
Show footage of the backyard, yeah.
And
then the family wanted nothing to do with any of the press or anything. They're like, "Leave us alone. We don't want to get pulled into this." And anytime somebody's like, "Leave me alone. I don't want to get pulled into this," I'm kind of more likely to believe their story. But I'm firmly convinced that Bigfoot might be kidnapping people off of Mount Shasta and other places like that. That's
Mount Shasta right is not so much Bigfoot. What people are saying is that what if Mount Shasta is what if Mount Shasta itself is like a portal or some sort of a not so much a portal, but there's UFO sightings Mount Shasta all the time. People say that UFOs fly into the mountain. What if there's a colony or a base or an ancient civilization within Mount Shasta? There's certain places they say that you just can't go in Mount Shasta.
Yeah, and there's a couple of places like that
above those clouds.
I've heard some weird stuff about the Mount Shasta. I know there's probably weird stuff in the Grand Canyon where they won't let us go. The Skinwalker Ranch stuff that they've been seeing. There's a lot of stuff. There's something
Grand Canyon one is crazy.
Yeah, there's this weird geological formation just off the coast of California under the water, near where a lot of the Tic Tac stuff has been seen, where they say aliens go in and out all the time, or UFOs go in and out all the time. That maybe there's an underwater base there. There's all kinds of weird stuff, and now we're starting to see reproducible scientific interactions with weird, strange things in the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. And you've got like real scientists doing things saying, I can't explain this. And the big thing for me was, for years, I've loved listening to Michio Kaku because he's like one of the astrophysicists who can kind of break things down a lot like Neil deGrasse Tyson and say things where normal people can understand it. And for decades, he has said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and the burden of proof is on all of the people claiming weird stuff. Until after the 2017, well, no, but until after the 2017 Tic Tac videos and all those videos came out. And he has since said, well, I have evidence now on sensors from the military with data. So the burden of proof to figure out what it's doing is now on me as a scientist. And when someone like that changes their tune because he's seen something, he's always been open for it. That tells me, I don't know what all it is, but something else is out there. So I guess, maybe they faked the moon landings. Daniel and I think, are never going to agree with you on that, but there's a lot of other stuff that I'm more likely to argue that we found aliens on the moon when we landed there than that we faked the moon landing. I believe that a lot more.
I heard a theory that we found something additional. If we landed on the moon, something called like a soul. What is it? A soul. Shoot, I forgot what, but they found some sort of like a cube. It's like a 6-story cube is what they're saying, that's on the moon. And there's people that believe that that it's when you die, your soul gets reused or gets put back in. And some people believe we're made to suffer because maybe there's some entity or civilization that uses the energy that we produce.
Cube that was found by the Chinese rover.
What's that?
The Chinese rover spots a cube-shaped thing.
It's like 6 stories tall or something like that.
I don't know about that, but who knows? I'm 100% behind. So I read a whole book about the moon not being real, say that it being a placed object.
Yeah, there's ancient texts or even different mythology that says that the moon was placed there or the moon wasn't always there. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of weird stuff about the moon. Like it definitely appears to be, if not hollow, definitely has holes, like
Well,
pockets in
there's
it,
a
because
crust. They
its
say it's like
gravity
2 or
is
3
weird,
miles.
which they figured out with some of those lunar probes where they were crashing and they're like, hang on a minute, there's like, they figured out like, oh, there's no gravity, and then there's a lot, like, and they were crashing stuff into the moon. But it's the way that it's spaced, how big it is, how close it is. Like, there's a lot of things that make it suspicious. And again, it's one of those things where you're like, I don't know, aliens, God, it doesn't really matter. But like, it's the fact that the moon just happens to be exactly 300th the size of the sun, and also happens to just be 300 times the distance away. So it covers
Perfectly
the
eclipses the
like,
sun. Yeah.
What are the odds?
Yeah. Astronomical.
Well, that also is the size of it circumference wise is also the diameter or the dimensions of like the Great Pyramids or something like that. There's something.
No, the Great Pyramid is scale of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the Earth. Okay.
Yeah.
And the they were saying
it would, if you scaled it up, the bottom would fit within half the space of the circle. Does that make sense? So like, if it's this big, the bottom of the pyramid is here, and the points hit the top of the Earth.
Yeah, it's like right across the equator, and then there's a fun documentary.
The points hit the top of the circle.
There's a fun documentary from 2014 called "Aliens on the Moon: Truth Exposed." If you haven't watched it, you should, because it deals with a lot of the weird stuff that we have gotten photographs of on the moon, and they're like, we think this this looks like it might have been an old reactor. Well, kind of. It's like, this looks like it was a tower. This looks like it could have been an old building. This looks like something like a reactor. This shouldn't just be here at all. And it's a really interesting, because it's all about like photos that we've taken of the moons from all the probes and stuff. So
I'm sure half of them are photo artifacts, but the other half of them,
yeah.
So another documentary you got to check out is, they're both on YouTube. Bill couldn't get through it because of the narrator of the first one, but it's called Builders of the Ancient Mysteries, BAM. And there's 2 of them.
Bam.
And they dive into all of this stuff about like the meter being everywhere, and the size and the shapes of inside of the pyramids. And because I'm 100%, you mentioned it before we started, like their power, it's power of some, I don't understand.
They've never found any sort of mummy or sarcophagus.
Oh yeah,
it's got to be some sort of power,
and way older.
I believe
way older than
I believe they
predate 30,000 years, easy.
Yeah. Well, and they say inside of the pyramids, there's records of pharaohs or kings that go back something like 30 or 40 or 50,
no, you're talking
years.
About the king's list. So there's an Egyptian king's list, and there's a Sumerian king's list, and there's a third one that I can't quite remember. And the interesting thing about them is that when you look at them, like they start with and power was passed down from heaven, essentially, or from God or whatever. And then there's like a list of like 15 rulers that rule between 30 and 100,000 years each. And then the deluge happens, and then power is handed down from heaven again. And then it's like 300 years, and then 100 years, and then it's like regular lifespans from that point forward. And the thing that always was me is like, well, we can prove this one, we can prove this one, we can prove this. Well, they were just pretending for the
They made all that other stuff up. Yeah.
What? Yeah, what do you mean they just, and that's where that thing about like, well, their calendar system is different, or their time system is different. And something that I learned recently, again, Matt LaCroix got me to this. I started reading Sumerian texts and stuff. But most of our calendar, all of our time system, majority of our measurements, money, like everything is from Sumer. Like all of it. And we just and we're just going to be like, well, we're going to take money, and we're going to take commerce, and we're going to take agriculture, and we're going to take all this other stuff. But your king's list, you're lying. I'm like,
And Sumerians, they always quoted the Sirius star system, right? That their
I don't. There are a lot of stories in there, and yes, like, well, I know the Dogons specifically talk about Syria. So the Dogon are a
African tribe.
African tribe,
Yeah.
I think. French
and they
tribe.
knew about an additional star in that belt.
They knew about
we didn't
3. Know. They say that they think they have said that it is a
trinary system.
A trinary.
It's a trinary system, which apparently we just found out it actually is.
We did. Within the last year or two. But like they said it, and then it wasn't until later that, like in the 70s or something, they were like, "Yeah, it's 2," and now we're like, "Well, okay, it's actually 3. They were right." But
yeah.
But I mean, this is the path that I've been going down. Like, you read this old ancient Sumerian stuff, you read the apocryphal scriptures, and you start to realize that there's a lot of stuff that's been left out of these stories. Like, the Book of Enoch it's an abduction story. Like it's the same
as
Moses'
grandpa too, which means Moses could potentially be.
Well, and then we started looking at the Book of the Giants, which is even weirder. And it's super fragmented.
The Book of the Giants it talks about it. The Sumerian stuff talks about it as well. It's in the Enuma Elish and a couple other places. But like the idea is that the gods came to the planet and they put workers on the planet to work. And then when those workers were like, "We're done," then they killed one of the gods and used his blood to mix with this thing and to make a new worker. And then that was humans. And you're like, wait, like, are we talking about alien genetic manipulation? Because like, that's like, there's always that thing about 40,000 years ago of the Homo sapien brain size doubles. And we go from Homo sapien to Homo sapien sapien. And it just sort of happens. Well, I mean, like, I feel like a crazy person when you start to say this, but you're like, I'm reading 10,000-year-old religious texts that are saying that the gods just made us. Like, and that would explain so much.
Look at the stones.
How do you deal with that?
Look at what's left in all freaking corners of the globe. All of these monuments, artifacts, or whatever else.
Have you seen the Sage Wall? Have you heard about this?
Which one is this one?
It's in, oh crap, I forget where it is. It's in Montana.
This is interesting.
Are you familiar with the Younger Dryas impact theory?
Yes. The 11,000.
So you're aware of the flood and all that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would explain why a lot of the North American, if there had been North American megastructures, that a lot of them could have gotten
destroyed
in that sort of situation.
Yeah.
Well, on this mountain in Montana, where these people, people don't look, they found this wall that looks, people come out and said, like, "Oh, it's a natural geological formation," and you're like, "That."
But it's got the stones that are like perfectly placed.
It's got all these, and it's got gaps in it. It looks like and then when they realize is that it kind of got cleared out, they realized, oh, it's a channel. It's like this channel running down this mountain, and only one half of it's really survived. The other half's kind of fallen down. But when you like look, and it's just like, okay, so again, this is the whole, Bill and I have been talking about this forever. Like, we have to rewrite the story. We are so wrong about what's going on here.
And let me give you an even more structured example of why we have to rewrite the story. Right up the road from me, like 12 miles from my house, we got to interview the head of the Galt site. It's an archaeological site 12 miles away, which is probably one of the single most important archaeological sites in North America, because we have the whole Clovis first idea, which has been around forever. And they dug down, and then like 4 inches below that, they started finding more and more and more and more and more other people that were here before Clovis. And the time to bedrock, where they hit bedrock and they couldn't go any further, pushes back to up to 20,000 years ago, completely blowing away that. And this is just proven science, period. There's no arguing with it at all. There's no debate. It's like Clovis first is just wrong. But you know what's in a lot of textbooks still? Clovis first. Because they just don't want to rewrite it. There's too much ego and money and academia tied into it that these people don't want to be wrong.
Religion too. I think
Well,
that
there's
people,
science is a religion. That's part of the problem. You have scientists who have tossed out the scientific model, and they're so tied up in their own personal stuff they can't afford to be wrong. So they're dogmatic.
Yeah.
They're religious in their.
If
It's got to be this. It's got to be
if
this. It's got to
no
be this.
amount of evidence will dissuade you, you don't have an opinion. You have a religious ideology.
yes,
Exactly.
I agree. I concur. Well,
And I
and
think-
this is what they're saying. What they're saying is that during the Great Floods, there's like mythologies or there's stories or texts that say the Great Floods were designed to get rid of the giants or the Nephilim that were from the Anunnaki and the humans interbreeding or whatever else. But what if it didn't? What if some of them survived? And that's what they're saying potentially that Mount Shasta could be. What if during
maybe.
the floods, some of them landed in Mount Shasta, and they've
Well, that's
been
the whole-
underground in Mount Shasta, or like
that's like
Antarctica. There's
The whole
pyramids
Atlantis
and-
myth, right? Maybe there were survivors from the Atlantis or whatever the previous civilization was, or I mean
Mhm.
I don't think that's beyond the pale, beyond the idea.
Yeah. Well, and Göbekli Tepe is telling us now that
Well-
there could have potentially been like genetic modifications that have happened. What if Göbekli Tepe is the Garden of Eden? What if that's
I think it's so much more complicated than that. I mean, we got Göbekli Tepe, and now we've got Karahan Tepe as well,
Mhm.
which is just around. And they think,
And they're
there's
finding
a bunch
more.
of them.
They're finding
more and more of them?
What's-
Yeah.
What's really interesting about them is if you look really closely, you'll see that there's the stone circles and they're built in, and what you realize is that this is the second use, because they've put these back up and the walls are built around some of the art, like that.
Yeah.
It's clearly been cycled
Well, they said it was
through.
intentionally buried as well.
At
so
least
that it would
once.
be preserved.
This would have been the people who intentionally buried it would have been reusing the site from someone before them.
Potentially,
I see what you're
yeah.
saying.
That's
Similar to how now they believe the Egyptians kind of reclaimed the pyramids from the civilization
For sure.
before them.
For sure.
And the other thing is, at some level, we just know our ideas are wrong because it's as simple as like I did the DNA test thing. I've got Neanderthal DNA in me. We now know that our whole idea of the story of humanity is wrong. It's just wrong. The one we grew up with is wrong. The linear caveman thing is not true. So we need to be open to a lot of new ideas.
Didn't we discover, like, we have in our DNA sequence, like, this unknown strand that we don't know where it comes from? There's like
It's an unknown hominid.
Yeah,
But they found one.
They found an unknown hominid that is
Mostly
only
Asian.
Found in, well, I think there's two. Then there's another one that they only find in Aboriginal Australia and Aboriginal South America, like Brazil.
There's that one.
There's
There's
a
that one.
connection between those two. Then you're right. Then there's another one that they've also found recently.
Well, there's the Denisovians, which they finally found
Right.
some evidence, like some physical evidence of them. But there's also, I've heard rumblings of coming out of Asia and like northern,
Mhm.
far eastern Russia, another unknown hominid from DNA samples, like unknown hominid X. So we keep finding more and more on the family tree.
The
but-
story is getting more and more complicated.
Yes. Yeah. It is. And
well,
and our traditions have been around longer than we thought they have. It just has to be.
yeah.
So.
Well, in the Book of Enoch, man, that thing is. Why is it not included in the Bible if it was intended to
Politics.
be a part of the Bible?
Politics. And we could do a whole episode on this.
Governmental ineptitude.
No, this goes back to
Control.
power,
Wanting to-
power and
control
control.
the narrative.
And Athanasius didn't want those more Gnostic leaning books in there, and so like a good Dark Age Romanesque person, he had those books tossed out and his enemies executed.
Yeah.
It was control of the early church.
And
That's
then-
why they're not in
and then
there.
they swept across Europe and just killed everyone who held a different
destroyed.
opinion.
Or
until
or
they got
simply
up
absorb
to-
their traditions.
Mhm.
You know.
Well,
yeah.
this is why Easter's a pagan holiday. Christmas is a pagan holiday. You know,
Mhm.
Jesus wasn't born in December.
He was born sometime in like June or July. Yeah.
That's the if it's if you
Now,
actually get
is there
historical
an
Jesus-
actual record of a man,
Yes.
Jesus Christ, or is there?
Yes. There are Roman historical records of a man named Jesus who was
born in
executed
town.
by crucifixion by Pilate. That is historical fact.
Okay.
We have
I read
non-biblical documentation from the Romans about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I read a really fascinating book called Zealot by Reza Aslan, which is really interesting. And he goes through the process of comparing historical Jesus to biblical Jesus and looking at what if there really was a person there, what his
Yeah.
life would have looked like and who he would have been. But it's really interesting because it gets into the idea of like, we have this story about the census and everybody had to go home. And he's like, that didn't happen. Could you imagine like the upheaval of society if you made everybody leave their business and go to a different city that's insane. That wouldn't have happened. There was a census, but it was where you were. You didn't leave. And
You
go
simply
back
reported where
you
your
were.
lineage was from, right? Yeah. So let me
And
give you a
but
short.
The reason that
Oh, go ahead.
hang on, the reason that they had to do that was because it had to fit the
Narrative.
pre-existing narrative of born in the town of David, and
Mhm.
there was all this.
They had to fit the
scriptural stuff,
biblical
and so they just
prophecy.
they just kept fixing the story, and it talks about why it changes over the series, over the 3 stories that it's in, is because when this one was written, this was the piece of the prophecy that was most important. When this one was written, this different thing was now more important, so they changed it a little bit, and then it changed again. And so it's one of those weird things where like there probably totally was a dude who was a religious guy and he preached this stuff and they killed him for it, but like what it turned into was something very different. It's a great
And so let me give you how they broke it down to us in seminary when we got into the historical Jesus versus the Jesus of faith. They said, so people want to believe in a savior who was born of a virgin, who then was married to a man who respected her and the divine birth, not the fact that Mary was raped by a Roman soldier and impregnated, and then her parents paid off a carpenter to marry her and claim the kid as his own. Nobody wants to hear that story. That will break you.
Yeah.
And I watched people in seminary's faith break when they heard that coming out of their professor's mouth. And he goes, because statistically, the historical Jesus was probably the child of a violent rape. And they had to do something to legitimize him. Otherwise, he would have been ostracized by society.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things that happen and change, and they have to interweave the prophecy. And then there's Q, which is a fascinating book that we don't have, because there's enough evidence in the 3 main, I don't want to say main gospels, the 3 traditional gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that tie in together, that biblical scholars believe there was an earlier, that then all of those were modified from. But we don't have a copy of Q.
It's the same thing of working backwards and figuring out that there's a missing species of hominid.
Yeah.
They can look at all
These
these
all
and go
triangulate
like,
and come together.
They're all saying these same things, so clearly they must be referencing.
They're referencing some other document.
Finding
Especially since they
ancient
were all
maps that were written based
yes,
on
yeah, because they were all written 20, 30, 40 years apart. So and they weren't spread everywhere where they were written, because you couldn't print books the same way. So obviously there was some other text that they were referencing, and that text could have been the one dude who was there, who saw it, who was going around telling everybody. It could have been an oral tradition.
Is it possible? Is it possible that text could be in the Vatican archive?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I
We're gonna have to have you back
picked up
on.
a book that I found the other day that's like the history of the Vatican archive. I'm fascinated.
The most secure place on the planet.
Well, so here's the other thing though. Like, yes, possibly there could be something in there. The question is, do they even know they have it?
At this point, who knows?
You know, and then there's, you know, I see these pictures of things. I mean, you look at like, there's the Ashurbanipal library out of Sumer, which is all cuneiform tablets. Well, we've translated what? 10, 15%
Handful
of
of
those.
them.
Like,
Yeah.
there's, you see these things on internet, and the meme, and you look into it, and you're like, there's some library in India with 100,000 scrolls in them. None of them have been translated. Like, who knows what information we're sitting? We mourn the loss of the Library of Alexandria, and I'm like, but we're sitting on libraries right now that we're not reading.
Yeah.
Who knows what's in there?
Yeah, I saw a fascinating YouTube video where somebody traced the burning of libraries throughout the Dark Ages and leading up to the Dark Ages. And it was like, obviously somebody didn't want us knowing some stuff because they burned every major library across the entire continent and subcontinent. So,
yeah.
Well, I hate to cut it short. We're going to have you back, Anthony. There's so much stuff we could talk about, but I got to get my kids in bed. School starts tomorrow. So, yeah, this has been a lot of fun.
No worries. Yes. Yeah, hey, can I tell you guys one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go for it.
Are you familiar with the podcast, The Y-Files?
Yes.
We watch it all the time.
I stumbled upon it. It's amazing, mind-boggling, blown.
But I sent him an email asking if he wants to come on, so we're hoping to get him on. So, yeah.
Oh, dude, that would be so awesome.
Yeah, we love talking to content creators.
Oh, awesome, dude, that would be cool.